Kennedy Nolan is an architectural practice that works principally on residential projects. A good portion of this work is for individual clients who engage us to design their houses. The practice attempts to make architecture that is highly responsive to its context, which I think Stefano just covered. Much of the work seeks to form a strong relationship between building and landscape in any environment. We design our houses, but it is the occupation of the building that makes it a home. You do not need an architect to make a home, and not everyone would consider where they live to be their home. Home is personal, and it's not just the building. However, a well-designed house can make a profound contribution to the inhabitant's sense of home. I always enjoy returning to projects long after the completion to see the transformation of house into home, to see the client take full ownership of what seems shared during the process of design and construction. Today I would like to discuss the design of homes on small sites. Recently our practice was invited by the Melbourne School of Design to exhibit as part of the Alumni Retrospective Series. This gave us the rare opportunity to look at the body of work that we've been producing over the last 12 years. Part of the exhibition was an A2 book of floor plans reviewing selected projects. Many of these were individual houses, and what really stood out was the disparity in the housing size that we'd been working on over the years. I guess this is the drawing I'd like to spring from in this discussion. It felt almost empirical that big isn't always better when looking at 44 site plans at a scale of 1:100. It's hard not to have favourites, and I believe the small, challenging sites produce the most interesting homes. Surely building smaller is the first sustainable box that could be ticked. Small houses, when well designed, needn't feel compromised. They don't need to be the house you have before you can afford the bigger house. I'll refer to past projects to demonstrate some of the ideas that we've explored in our practice when designing with small residential sites. So as a starting point, this very first drawing, I've actually selected 4 projects, which are small projects, and they're all lined up on the left-hand side of the image. And it's another project which is not an untypical size for in our practice. I guess the tennis court at the top of the page is a lovely scaling device just to be able to look at what size these small houses are on. The first being in the top left-hand corner, a townhouse development in Fitzroy that we completed a few years back, about 7 years back. The second one is a new house in Richmond. This little one down here is an alteration addition to a house in Collingwood, and the bottom one's an alteration addition in North Fitzroy. So I'll talk you through some of these images from these houses. And the house on the right, I mean, to its credit, is a total recycle of what the clients actually wanted us to pull down. So it had its merits, but you can certainly see the disparity in the size of these sites. So I'll go through these, let's come up a different colour, through these kind of areas which we've explored. When space is of a premium, equal consideration needs to be given to built form and the area outside of it. How a house relates to its boundaries, neighbours and landscape is an important part of the design process. And this area of landscaping is actually one of the reasons where Pat and I set up practice back in '99, because we were very careful of the landscape design component. Landscape can assist with ventilation, moderate light, and it can provide privacy. It can be of a size you can inhabit, or it may be just a small garden that performs a passive role that's there to be enjoyed from sitting inside. This house in North Fitzroy is on a 160 square metre site and has 3 external spaces designed into it. And this is a little alteration addition to a single-storey workers' cottage. You can see this area at the front, the 3 gardens through it, and the size again compared to that tennis court. The entry space is designed to conceal a service garden. The second external space is for dining, cooking and play. And the third is a passive planted area off the rear living space, which you can see looking through this zone. The 2 rear spaces are an acoustic buffer between living zones, yet allow for visual access through this small site. The architecture allows for doors to open, thresholds to dissolve when the seasons allow for it. In conjunction with the building section, these small external spaces are an effective way of bringing light into long, narrow and small sites. In this Fitzroy townhouse, a 3-storey light well at the rear of the property was animated by the application of a giant 2 painted on the rear wall. It was actually apartment townhouse 2. The light well became a dramatic feature of the residence, and I think it's a nice little example where it doesn't have to be animated always by planting or landscape. It can be another gesture beyond that. These are some further examples of projects of ours where we're looking at designing beyond the building footprint. And certainly, I love this image, and I particularly love this rear garden, where the threshold from inside to outside is this kind of slow bleed in the materials. The lined vertical timber wall, it also acts like a kind of boundary wall between neighbours, but it conceals all of the service area of this house, and garage, workshop, and the rest of it behind there. This is another small house in Middle Park where a similar device is being used for car at the rear of the property, but the garden's been very considered, the view to it, and right down to that little side garden that flanks the boundary on the north there, which is just bamboo. This is a house in Elwood, and you can see again the views through to different spaces around the house, not just looking out to a typical rear back garden. Options for habitation, I think, is an important area to discuss. So a flexible floor plan can give those living in the house some choice. It can allow them to adapt to their home to their needs. The plans for this 160 square metre sited house in Richmond is a particular favourite in our office. We often come back to it, and we really enjoyed revisiting this house when we were getting this exhibition ready. It's a tiny, tiny little 8 by 20 metre site. It was initially designed for a couple, and then something went wrong and we found ourselves with just the one client. And he required a building that could still appeal to a broader market, and this is a 3-bedroom plus garage inner city box ticker of a house. As a single inhabitant of this house, he was able to use every space that we designed. Simple changes could see his study and piano room easily convert to the additional bedrooms that the real estate agents seem to require. We've got this little study at the front beside the off-street car parking, and the music room sitting there in the middle, which also has visual access to the rear courtyard and this space where the car is. I'll talk about that a little later. So this is a view down that spine through the courtyard back to that area where we had a music room sitting in here, which could be other things as well, and the view from the kitchen back out to that courtyard in the middle. So again, not dissimilar to the house in North Fitzroy with the gardens, views through this very small property. Looking back to the kitchen at the rear of the property and that concealed door that opens up so the kitchen has a direct relationship with that courtyard. Did a lot of jobs, that little courtyard. Big gestures. Maintaining a handsome scale in the design detail is often best demonstrated in joinery and fenestrations in these small projects. Probably the smallest footprint of the projects that I'll show you today is a 120 square metre site, is this little house in Collingwood. I love this client for not wanting to overload this little site. He's a big bloke in a small house, so the design detail had to be of a substantial scale to kind of enable him to feel comfortable in it. So it's basically a two-storey house with an existing room at the front, a kitchen, separated living and dining, and a bedroom, suite and bathroom at the top. His small kitchen has most storage integrated behind the white wall panels. You can see in that earlier slide where the kitchen sits. The panels in the kitchen, looking up to that rear area. It is the overscaled workbench along one wall that uses mirror to the ceiling that defies the original worker's cottage dimensions in which it is housed. So a very simple device, just looking at scale in those design detail areas. The big gesture can also be felt in the selection of robust and enduring materials. Stone floors, painted brickwork, a lined timber ceiling allow a small space to feel generous and are also very forgiving in these high traffic areas, which everything's high traffic when you've got a tiny little site. The bathroom located on the first floor has a similar scaled up gesture with a shower curtain extending the entire width of the property. He certainly wasn't a shy man using that bathroom on the first floor in Collingwood. These are some additional examples of projects of ours where substantial building materials have been used. House in Middle Park. And these materials are often materials that could be used externally. You can see in that small house in North Fitzroy, that cranked wall is lined with painted timber lining boards. And the thresholds again are blurred using the crazy paving throughout the house. That's looking back into the tiny little kitchen combined with laundry. You can see the stairs almost cranking up over that cooking area beyond. And we often use a lot of brickwork, painted brickwork inside too. That almost looks like it was an original wall, but it was a new wall. It's another project in Brunswick where the crazy paving has been used again to blur that threshold between inside and out. Minimising circulation of space, I'll get through this. Cutting down on circulation is an obvious space saver. In the Richmond house, the entry was external to the building. Typically you'd knock on the front door and spend all your money on a hallway running down to the back. In the Richmond house, the entry was external and formed part of the landscape. The central courtyard performed many roles, including that of entry. The gravel undercover car space could also function as a usable garden if the inhabitants chose not to have a car. That's that little entry from when you walk through the gate at the front. You can see on that bottom shot, the gate on the left and integrated with the garage door and the view down to the kitchen. This development in Fitzroy accommodates 3 townhouses, each on approximately 85 square metres of land. The new 3-storey building incorporates a 1970s single-storey corner brick warehouse. You can see it back there in that shot that had been rough rendered around the bottom of the site. Enabled us to have 0 setback and narrow, which was terrific. Stairs through 3 levels required careful placement. In the middle residence, the straight run of stairs spanned double and triple height voids, where circulation was used to introduce light, air and provide visual access throughout the home. So highly programmed service. There are lots of jobs that have to be done in a small house and none of them are particularly glamorous. Clothes need to be washed and dried and rubbish needs to be handled and stored for a week. When dealing with space compromised sites, it's important to consider the location of these very carefully and really from the outset, which I think comes back to the site planning. You can see in this small house in North Fitzroy the planning in this area at the front. And looking back at these shots, so there's a small one of Pat standing in there before, at the before shot, where it was just an small entry, unusable court off Rachael. And you can see it there on the left, what happened, where we kind of controlled the way of entering when we had water storage. The service court located at the front of this house accommodates a vegetable garden, water tanks, rubbish bins, garden tools and bikes, and also has a clothesline. So there's a lot of jobs being done in that small space. Rationalise your requirements. This is one I feel quite passionate about. We encourage our clients to provide us with a written brief when starting out. This is the time to face the reality of budget and rationalise what it is at the core of their requirements of home. Often these lists read like there is a need for a room for every job to be done in the house. Over the years in practice and personally in all of the homes I've lived in, I've enjoyed the inclusion of unprogrammed space, which I've taken to calling a grey room. This room can be adapted to the changing needs of the occupants or perform a variety of roles in parallel. Often a study, guest room, TV room, children's play, all of these types of rooms can lend themselves to this shared arrangement. This room is in a house in Elwood, could perform most of these roles for the client. A large sliding door enabled it to open up to the hallway and have access to the garden deck, and the family in this house could adapt this space to their needs. Maybe it's a low note winding up my talk today with toilets, but this is an area which could do with much rationalising. Most contemporary houses these days have a minimum of 2 toilets, and it's not unusual for there to be more toilets than people in houses. I think we've gone toilet crazy. A bathroom can double as a powder room with rational planning, and this is just a very simple little plan in that small house in North Fitzroy where they're back to back, but if you tuck a shower or a shower or a bath around the corner, it can still work as a powder room. You can pretty easily creep up to 3 or 4. People start to think they believe they need 3 or 4 toilets. Does every child need their own bathroom? Maybe there are lessons to be learnt in having to share. I just couldn't help myself, had to put this in. I think it's an example of when our requirements can easily get out of hand. That's a doghouse. Magnificent doghouse. It's all relative, and you don't have to travel far to realise Melbourne small is actually very generous, nearly palatial in a city like Tokyo or Bombay. It's time to reflect on what we need from our homes rather than what we want in our homes. With a focus on good design, this outcome doesn't need to feel like a compromise.